Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. Returning to the podcast, it's been a few years, is Matt Smith to discuss the book he co-authored with Doug Casey and Maxim Smith, his son. I've got the digital version here. It's called The Preparation: How to Become Competent, Confident, and Dangerous. ¿Cómo estás, Matt?
It's nice to see you. Actually, it was 4 years ago, I think, this month. This was the last time we did one of these. And yeah, it's awesome to be back with you. Different circumstances in the world, but the same circumstances in the world. Isn't that weird?
It is, same difference, as they say. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And the topic is a bit different, but in some ways related. And so you guys put this book out, I think a couple months back. And, I have to say it surpassed my expectations. I'm always reading books from guests, and I was telling you before we hit record, I have to get a print copy just for myself. It's that kind of book. And I think you guys said earlier, the working title was Renaissance Man, which I honestly would have preferred, but I get why the preparation. And so maybe just to start, why the book?
Well, I'll give you a little background on the book. I mean, Doug Casey first tried to pitch me on writing this book with him 12 years ago. I remember it distinctly. We were driving from his house to have lunch in Aspen. And he said, Matt, I've been thinking about writing this book for a while now. And, want to call it Renaissance Man. And when I asked him more about it, and he said, well, the book should be about the three most important verbs in every language: be, do, and have. He says this. I have more questions. I don't really understand what that even means. But nothing happened with it. I mean, the truth is that Doug has written a lot of books, and he's repeated to me time and time and again that writing a book is a lot of brain damage and you don't make any money. So, he's the one, if anybody, who made me never want to write a book. But and he brought it up every few years, actually, because it's been like in his mind, I think, for who knows, maybe a decade before that, because he's known as an economist, but I think he's really, really interested in like human potential and human development is kind of like what he's really into. So the premise of the book is what a young man ought to do instead of misallocating 4 really important years to college and, of course, the money. I have to say, though, it's been clear to me since the book has been published, it's not clear. It's not only a book for men between 18 and 22. That's become extremely obvious. And in fact, I'd say more broadly, I guess the book is it's definitely written for men, not to say women wouldn't get something out of it, but it's written for men. And it's men who have not yet found their thing, found their place, found out who they really are. And, but again, it's designed with the idea of somebody who's deciding whether or not to go to college in mind. And the reason that the book actually came into being, after years of sort of putting Doug off, my son at 17 years old, on the cusp of 18, was where one would normally go to college or something. He was full of all kinds of anxiety and like he just come out in anger, even, because he wasn't happy with where he wasn't happy with who he was, and he didn't have a clear path forward. And frankly, I probably contributed to that path because I'm an entrepreneur and a college dropout. And so he did not grow up in an environment where I said, hey, college is the key to success. If I'd even given him that much, maybe he would have had, at least some track in mind that would have caused him some comfort, even if it wouldn't have been good for him. But he was pretty anxious and in a bad spot. So I called Doug up and I said, this thing you talked about years ago, like, let's flesh it out a little bit more. And so over a couple conversations, he gave me enough material basically to put on a napkin. And it was broken down essentially into, games, activities, and skills, I guess. Games, occupations, and activities. That's what it was. And, basically these were the things he thought in his mind a Renaissance man ought to be able to do. And so it was with that sort of template that I recruited my son to be our beta tester for the last 2 years and actually see if we can make it work. And, as time went on and we began to kind of formalize things and we figured out, yes, it could be a book. And ultimately that's what we have today. And yeah, I've done a lot of things in my life, but honestly, I think this is the thing I'm most proud of because I think it'll have the most impact. Certainly, it has for my son. He, yeah, I've said this before in other podcasts, but it just shocks me every time I think of it. He definitely was a boy when he started. I mean, he was clearly a boy, and somewhere along the lines, probably on I think on the sailing cycle, and we can get into cycles later. Um, he came back different, just different. So yeah, he's gone from being a boy to a man, and all except for one thing. I don't think anybody can really be a man until they have children, honestly. But other than that, I think he's got all the raw materials there, and he is thriving and he's crushing it. I mean, I'll tell you more about what he's doing now. I mean, it's very interesting.
There's so much there, but since you brought up one, I had this in my notes for the end of the conversation, but one conclusion that I came to. So you mentioned the demographics, 18 to 20 something year old men. But on the one hand, as I'm reading this, number one, I thought this is for adults, at any age, later age, who want to go back and do things that they never did. I was just looking at when I was reading some of the cycles. I'm like, I want to do the no code thing, or some of the other stuff that I never got to in my lifetime. And then as well for children, you mentioned homeschooling. You guys mentioned homeschooling in the book, and that's the way to go. I was talking with a former podcast guest of mine yesterday, and he was saying if he had to do it, his children are in their 20s now, but he said if he had to do it all over again today, he would homeschool his kids. And I could see myself now applying some of the stuff from the first part of your book, as well as the second, the cycles, running them through my kids today. So just any thoughts on that?
I completely agree. And since COVID, we homeschooled our kids because then I got, the curtain was fully pulled back and we could really see through Zoom what was really happening and saw how absurd it was. And so we started homeschooling then. I wished we'd done it sooner. And I also wish that I'd put the thought into the book sooner because many of these things could be done by kids that are much younger. For instance, one of the cycles is becoming a pilot. You can get your pilot's license before you can get your driver's license, as insane as that is. So there's a lot of things that are not age restricted here. And certainly the basic structure of these, of these adventures where you get hands-on learning, like that's a great and exciting way to teach children. Well, it's an exciting way to teach anyone of any age, frankly. But for homeschooling, I think there's lots of things that directly apply. And there's lots of things that if you go through the entire thing, you can see how you can adapt them for whatever's age appropriate for your kids.
You guys can start your own little academy, or I think I read somewhere you guys are going to start some sort of foundation. No, or
yeah, well, that's the idea. If the book sells well enough, and there's enough kids that are doing it, then I would want to fund and raise funds for a foundation that would help facilitate it. Maybe by having some facilities where you could bring in one of these experts that are discussed in the book, bring them in house for a cycle, and have 15 or 20 kids at a time attend that cycle together. So yeah, I think that there's ways we can be more active in making sure people it's as easy to implement as possible. And I think that's a worthwhile pursuit. So yeah, that's something but only if the book sells enough, we get enough traction and young people pick it up and run with it. And we know of several that are, because they're already posting they're basically posting their accountability stuff on Substack. And so, we know who they are.
And then, maybe so the first part of your book is basically like theory. And then the second part is practice, and we'll touch on some of that. And the manliness aspect, let's say, Maxim writes in his chapter early on, the typical life checklist, right? Go through K through 12, college, get a job, get married, have a kids, retire. And, I want to say none of that is bad on its own. You can kind of do both in some ways, living this Renaissance man life and do some of that stuff. And I think here it says, young men have no clear, meaningful path to follow, no understanding of success. Society doesn't value them. They have few people to emulate or admire. And, when I'm reading through your book, I was thinking, some of the stuff I intuitively came to that conclusion when I was a teenager, and I realized I'd been indoctrinated. We were taught to become metrosexual in many ways,
Yeah.
right? The globalist agenda. And then I was thinking of my rough grandfather who'd survived Nazi concentration camps in Bosnia during World War II. And my uncle who was a black belt martial artist who killed Serbs with commando Arnold Schwarzenegger knives. I'm not even kidding. And so I'm like, what am I doing? I don't know how to do anything. And so you were on Art of Manliness recently. I love Brett McKay and his podcast.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah.
He early on his website helped me start on the correct path. I just wanted to mention, and so what I did, I read books to find people to emulate. And you mentioned sailing. When I was in Mongolia, in the communal library, I found a book from Sterling Hayden. Hayden. So he was a military man, OSS, during World War II, an actor in The Godfather, Dr. Strangelove. He's the guy who starts World War III in Dr. Strangelove. And then he became a sailor. And his book, I think it was called, he used the phrase always, veil, wanderer. And I'm like, this is a manly man. And this is the sort of stuff I want to do. And then, Bruce Dickinson from Iron Maiden, who musician, world famous success, sport, fencing. He became a pilot. He piloted their own 747 to the tours. I'm like, these are the kind of people we want to look up to. Clint Eastwood, right? His personal life, but also his on-screen life. I love these spaghetti westerns, and so maybe just for you to touch on that aspect, and Maxim touches on it. All three of you touch on it, but Art of Manliness embodies that. And the Dos Equis man, the most interesting man in the world, which you guys cite in the book. So just further thoughts here.
Yeah. I mean, well, you just see it, the honorable, virtuous, masculine male is not, there's been an attempt to remove them from discussion and visibility. And of course they exist. They exist in books, they exist in our memories of certain family members we all have. But there are a few contemporary examples that people can even point to. Unfortunately, we have to spend more time in books to see them than we can see them in the real world, because they're basically shut out, and it's quite intentional. It's quite intentional. I mean, the demoralization of young men, especially young white men, is really intense. The stuff that my kids dealt with when they were going to both, supposedly really good private schools as well as good public schools, was intense and shocking. Actually, when I discovered what was going on, I couldn't believe it. I mean, teaching them all about white privilege, and I have a daughter, and they were actively recruiting LGBT stuff. I mean, it's like by the skin of my teeth, I think I saved her from that by homeschooling in time. So it's wild. There aren't good examples out there, but young men are craving it, and young men, what they're craving most, and what I hope the book satisfies for them, is that a good young man knows he wants to be somebody. I want to be somebody, and they know also to be somebody they need to do something worthy, to do something. And I think the reason that they're demoralized at this stage is because there is no path, there is nothing laid out for them that looks like it's a worthy pursuit that would actually accomplish them becoming the man they hope to be. So, and that relates to another question about what we try and flip the something on its head in the book, and people ask, when your kids are really little, right? You ask them what they want to be when they grow up, and they say Spider-Man or a fireman, and you're like, awesome, those are all good answers, right? But the great thing is they are at least engaging their imagination, and they are trying to think of honorable, virtuous figures. So they're being channeled through Spider-Man, but they're actually channeling the virtues in them, and so this is good. We ask these questions though throughout their life, and as they get closer to adulthood, the question becomes much more serious, where an answer like that is going to engage their imagination is unacceptable. Essentially, we're asking them, when you ask an 18-year-old, what are they gonna, who are they gonna be when they grow up, or what are you gonna do? It's like, who are you gonna work for? Like, that's the question. So we take this really kind of high-minded and cute question that when they're little, but really taps into some real innate genius in the kid. And we now ask them to think totally pragmatically about what they'll do to put a roof over their head. And that is deeply uninspiring. So our question for young men, and the question we want them to answer most of all in the book, is what kind of man do they want to become? And if they can get a clear picture of that, of the kind of man they want to become, the rest of the steps become pretty easy, because the kind of man they want to become would have the courage to take the steps that they have to take in the book. Would do the right thing, etc. And let me back up to Doug's main point where he said in the beginning, be, do, and have, because that is really what the book is about. Now, have is the thing that everyone, our society, our consumerist culture, is oriented toward. It's, I want to have this. I want to have the new iPhone. I want to, have this great vacation. I want to have a nice house, whatever. Have. That's what it is. What nobody ever bothers to mention is that have is a byproduct of doing. Doing is what gets you the have. And doing is where all the power that a young man has exists. I mean, at that age, they have unlimited energy. I mean, you and I are getting a little older, but you remember what it was like when there was no limit to the energy. I mean, you could go as long as you needed to go. That doesn't last forever. And so that's why giving up those 4 years to be kind of put on ice in college, put on pace, slow pace, is a huge mistake for young men, because there's so many better ways they can channel that way more rapidly and become a person that they can't even imagine within 4 years. So do is the leverage. Do is where the power is. And do is where we want people to focus more than anything else. But the only thing really that matters is be. It's what kind of man are you? That's really all that really matters. But the power for you, for a young man, to make massive changes in their life is in doing. And so that's what most of the book is about.
Hey, don't poo-poo the iPhone. So I just had to buy my wife the new iPhone. But it was, but
I'm sure it's really nice.
but I mean, hers it's 8 years old. 8 years since I bought her the last one, and it's cracked. And again, we don't care. My phone is like years old, and it's a cheap one. But the point is, it's the purpose. She really uses it for networking with so many people, homeschooling. Like that's the point. And I just wanted to add, what's so important what you say, because you talk to people, when I talk to people in America or Croatia, where people are very materialist, it's like they determine your value as a person on your job, your salary, and how much you make. And for me, it's like that's evil from my view, from a biblical worldview. From what you guys talk about, it's the opposite. And the question is, who do you want to be? As you say, what you want to be is sort of secondary. And I'm sort of, as I'm reading your book, I was kind of laughing. You say, you can travel to an exotic locale like Mongolia. I'm like, bro, I did that. I went to Mongolia, lived in the yurts. And this is another topic for later on. But I was amazed. Peace Corps is a great option. I mean, maybe it's a bit too long, but I think it fits into the idea of the cycle. And in 6 months, 3 months of intense language training, and after 6 months, I was took an exam and I was intermediate in Mongolian. I'm like, that's amazing. I mean, you can pick up languages. I know your son, you're saying he speaks Spanish now. And just my own life, I decided to chart my own way. I didn't want to follow what people were doing. I'm going to Mongolia. I'm going to Kazakhstan. I'm going to Switzerland. I ended up shaking hands with Gorbachev. I was in Russia for 3 months, doing this, doing that. And it's like, you can do these things, but people just follow the let's say the straight and narrow. And there's this quote you have in your book from Robert Heinlein from his sci-fi novel, and I got to read. It's something to aspire to. He says, quote, "A human being should be able to change a diaper, plan an invasion, butcher a hog, con a ship, design a building, write a sonnet, balance accounts, build a wall, set a bone, comfort the dying, take orders, give orders, cooperate, act alone, solve equations, analyze a new problem, pitch manure, program a computer, cook a tasty meal, fight efficiently, die gallantly. Specialization is for insects." And so thoughts on that, the Renaissance man, and as well, I've heard you talk elsewhere about slaves. Today, a lot of you said we have more slavery today than we had in the past.
Yeah, well, that Heinlein quote was probably my core inspiration for the book because, I mean, he's totally right. I mean, when you hear that, doesn't that like call to you and just be like, it doesn't that make you yearn for more in yourself? I mean, doesn't it just it has that power? And the truth is that we all can be so much more than we are by if we're willing to do what must be done to get there. And by denying ourselves that, we're basically denying ourselves the best of humanity in the process. And so the book attempts to direct people into specifically what they should do in order to uh, get to, I mean, maybe not everything on Heinlein's list, but virtually everything there, you'd be able to do it by the end of it. And, and I think that was a key course piece. Sorry, I can't speak today. Key piece of inspiration for me personally. I mean, I love Heinlein. He's great. So in terms of slaves, yes, we have more slaves today than ever, but it's a much more sophisticated system of slavery, and it's vastly more profitable. I mean, traditionally, if you're a slave owner, you actually are responsible for the care and maintenance of your slaves. I mean, if they get sick, you got to pay for their health care. If they need food, you got to make sure it's supplied. You got to make sure they have enough calories, or else they can't work efficiently. I mean, this is the burden of responsibility on the slave master is pretty heavy. Today, they've outsourced all of that and convinced you, that no, you're not a slave. You're actually free. Yes, it requires about $50,000. Actually, John Green just published this article yesterday, which was amazing, talking about the poverty rate and how that's actually calculated. And he updated the formula, and by his standards, and it seems very compelling, the actual poverty line in America today should be $140,000 a year. 140,000. And if you look at his math on it, you look at the way he did it 2 different ways, and it is compelling. And I'll say, based upon my own personal experience, I think it's totally valid because when I haven't been to the U.S. in 2 years, but the last time I was there, I commented to my wife, I don't know how people can afford this. Everything is so expensive. I don't know how they do it. And the truth is, they're doing it by taking on more debt, and they are beneath what we considered in 1963 the poverty line in terms of their standard of living. So they've got everyone convinced that they're free, and yet if they miss a day of work, if they miss a paycheck, they're going to be in real trouble. And they have them, everybody's purchasing at the company store, essentially. So these corporations who are all get you on a subscription plan of some kind for insurance or whatever else. And, all your money is drained out of you. And yet you are free and you're acting in free will and making these choices all on your own. So I think the vast majority of people are definitely enslaved today. And I think that they can feel it. They can feel that. I don't think most people feel free.
And I mean, on that point, we had Jones Plantation on recently, Drew Treglia, which he did.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
Yeah, and but also the crab mentality, because something I've noticed, there's people in the developed world that I know, and it's always they're telling me, "What are you doing in Mexico? It's a third world country," but they see me. I'm doing my own thing. Yes, I make less money, but it's kind of, I don't have that problem that you just described here in Mexico, where I take whatever day off I want. I mean, you saw me. I went off, took a 3-month vacation on the Adriatic.
We missed you.
Yeah, and I'm thinking like the people that I know in the U.S., they make much more money, but they can't. They only have like a week they can take off or 2, and I don't know their back situation regarding debt for homes and cars and schools. And they say, "Oh, I must save up for send my kid to the top university." I'm like, we get to that later. I'm like, I'm not sending my kid to university. I'm like, I'd rather just give her a pile of money and say, let me help you start a business or something. But what was my point? The crab mentality. So they often say, they try to reel me back in because they see I'm free, I'm content, I'm happy, and it's like, no, they want you to be miserable with them. And I think that's part of that slave mentality, as well as the people around you. They just go along to get along. And I mean, we saw that with COVID. They're yes men and women, and they look at you when you try to be like a Sterling Hayden or a Doug Casey. They're like, they get perturbed because you're wanting to be the black sheep. But I think they get perturbed because you're daring to do what they're too much of a coward to do. Just any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. I mean, I think there's a lot of lost young men today. And I'll just say, put this young men under 30. You could probably even go to 35 in that category and still be the same. Where because they've never once lived anything that could remotely be considered a hero's journey, that emptiness is still there in them, and it causes them a lot of grief. And a big part of this program is it's built in. I mean, there's a real hero's journey that takes place. I mean, you had your own. I think every man who I know who was really successful all had one, and they don't look back in their life with regrets. They don't reminisce about high school or college or any of that nonsense, because they'd gone somewhere, done something, got an understanding of themselves, and came back from that different. And that is such a critical. These rites of passage used to be built into our society, and they don't exist anymore at all. And so instead, the kid is just institutionalized for college, then institutionalized typically after college if they're lucky enough to get a job. And with that yearning, that voice in them is still calling to them, wanting out, wanting to figure out who they are. And unanswered, it definitely causes them a lot of grief, and they're going to try and deal with it, cope with it, essentially however they can.
And I really enjoyed the fact that you, because I think you've said you're a more private person, but the first part of your book, you guys lay out a lot of the, let's say, manly theory, but you talk about your backstory, which I wasn't aware of, and it was rough, it was raw. Your father, your brother, the economic situation of your family, but you overcame it with fortitude. And I think it's important to share our stories. In fact, my wife often says, you're telling people too much, like when we're hanging out somewhere. And I'm like, but that's what life is about. I'm halfway through life. I'm going to die, not long from now, a few decades. Why? Let's share each other's griefs and joys and happiness. And that's how you learn from each other. And, I was telling you this before I record on my podcast, people tell you, some idiot disgruntled ex-paid subscriber recently said I was a grifter for peddling the de-Googled above phone, which I use. And, I was thinking, for the first 10 years of Geopolitics and Empire, I never had my name on the podcast. People like, who the hell are you? And I'm like, it's not about me. I'm not trying to get rich and famous. It's like, it's about the guest and trying to figure out what's going on in the world. But eventually, I did this full time. I'm like, people said, well, people want to know who you are for different reasons, but it also, once they get to know you, that kind of helps processing the podcast better. And I'm going on a rant here, but just about you sharing your story. I think we can learn a lot as well, and it's the classic rags to riches as well. No,
it really is. I was poor white trash. That's the best way to describe it. And I would say, a huge motivator in me in my life, and it's kind of pathetic, but I'd say I ended up becoming financially successful while I was running away from being hungry. Like having a secure food supply was seriously a bizarre, almost OCD motivation for me for a long time. And I just woke up one day and I realized I had a lot more than I ever expected to have. But the big thing with telling a personal story in the book, this was a surprise that everybody. I don't tell anybody this stuff. This is the most personal thing about me possible, and it's not a happy thing. So it's not something I would normally bring up in conversation anyway. But you have to realize what I was doing with this book more than anything else is I was trying to give my son, who I really care about, as much as one can care about another human being. I was trying to give him everything I thought he needed now for where he is in his life now. And part of me being more personal about it was because, he kind of knew bits and pieces, but he didn't really know it. So part of it was just making sure he understood it. But also because of that process led to something. These tragedies led to something that were useful. And so I tried to share all the parts that I thought would be most useful to people. And I thought that and I had a really difficult time trying to write it in a way where I was abstaining from writing about the personal stuff, because it just sounded like a guy lecturing to you, which is, I don't ever want to be a person lecturing to anybody. So yeah, I mean, yeah, there is some stuff about me in there personally, absolutely. And it's unpleasant, but I think it's useful. And I think that the lessons from it are incredibly useful. I think they're like superpowers.
Yeah, and we'll leave that. We'll encourage people to purchase the book to learn more about the details. But it's the stoicism, the ability, the fact that you were able to overcome. And again, that's a lesson that you can overcome practically anything. There's a way to do it, and that's that road of becoming a man. And just going back to academia, why we shouldn't go in general to university. And I was doing something the other day for someone, and I came out with part of that process was I came across some websites related to high schools here in Mexico, Mexican high schools, or maybe university. I think it was high school. I was blown away on the webpage of some of these high schools in Mexico. Their gender studies. I'm like, what? Like, okay, we the U.S., but here in Mexico, why? It's demented, and so I'm a former. A lot of us are former students, but I'm a former high school teacher, university professor, and it's like I can attest. I can tell you, it's a waste of time. In one of my exploits in the 2000s when I was traveling around the world, Italy, Geneva, through a friend of a friend, we were hanging out with an up and coming Italian pop singer. I forget his name now. I don't know where he is, but we stayed at his father's castle in Milan. He was the Knight of Milan of the Order of Malta. I learned later, and
Nice.
I don't remember if it was him or his friend's apartment that we went to in Milan. But this is right up the preparations alley. Above in his restroom and above the toilet is where that guy framed his university diploma. And that is so powerful. And it's not to say, you guys have said this before, there are certain professions that are regulated. You have to do it, but there are a whole host, 50% or more. You don't need a university degree. I think I'm a podcaster now. It's like I learned it by doing it. And so just and I sent you a link yesterday, but I deleted it because I saw you had already a few days ago tweeted it out on X, where Bloomberg reported that the latest data shows a sharp deterioration in white-collar jobs, especially those holding four-year degrees, now making up a record 25% of all employed, or close to 2 million folks, the highest level since 1992. So just thoughts on how academia today, university is largely useless.
Well, I think there's three main things to consider. Number one, if you want the education, you can get the entire course load for MIT for free online. You're not going to get an MIT, odds are, if you're watching this, like you're not going to get in, but you can have access to their entire course load. Stanford, Yale, much of the same there. There is an unlimited amount of free or next to free education online. And we in the cycles, we actually lay out a specific curriculum that includes all the sciences, includes everything. I mean, you have a more well-rounded academic education coming out of this than you would if you went to any four-year university in the country. So that's number one. So if that's the goal, you want to make sure you're educated. I get that. You should be educated. It can be done. It can be done. Number two has to go back to this point that I mentioned before. It's that it's at what cost? At what cost? And that cost has two dimensions, of course. One is the economic costs. The all things in, including the lost potential low wage labor that they would have if they didn't go to college. Um, the total cost of that is roughly equivalent to the median household net worth in America today. So, is it worth your parents, your family's net worth, all of it, for you to go to college? I just got to think about that. It's an extraordinarily expensive thing. But if they aren't able to pay for it, then of course what you do is you get student loans, which can never be discharged no matter what happens to you in your life. You're stuck with them forever. If you think you're really interested in whatever architecture, and you study architecture, you enjoy that process, you enjoy school, you get into the job, and you realize that job has you doing duct work on industrial buildings, and you realize that this, after 5 years of doing that, you don't get promoted. You realize that you made a mistake. What are you going to do? You've got this debt overhang now that you cannot walk away from. You've got rent in Boston or wherever you're living that you have to pay for. You literally can't afford to not have that paycheck. You're stuck. So that's something that's super important to consider, because when we're 18, how is it possible that as an 18-year-old, it does happen, but it's so rare that you really know what you want to do with your life. I'm 50. I don't know what I want to do with my life. I've been doing a lot of stuff, but like that question, there's no chance I had no chance of answering it at 18, no chance. And so you don't even know what's possible. And I think that's the key thing. You can't even imagine what's possible. So it's a big mistake, I think, to commit yourself to that. The time and the money is incredibly high. The third thing, and this is the riskiest thing, and I have to say, though, this does happen more to women than to men, but I know of two separate parents who've told me directly, independently, that they lost their daughters to university, lost their daughters. They will no longer speak with them. They will no longer have anything to do with them, because they have been lost to the university. They completely got brainwashed. So that's the worst case scenario. Does it happen all the time? No, of course not. But I do know two parents who legitimately told me this. And the first one I heard, I was shocked. I relayed the story to another, and he goes, "Me too." So this is terrible. What will you do to not lose your children? For me, anything. So the risk of that possibility of that happening it just scares the crap out of me, honestly. So I think for those reasons alone, you have enough reason not to go to college. But then you can start looking at the economics around how well do people do after they graduate. It turns out the highest unemployment rate is among recent college graduates of anywhere around now. And it's not just the people who studied nonsense sociology stuff. It is got people who graduated degrees in chemistry and physics and computer science also. So whatever's going on in our economy, it is completely shafting the young people right now. And it makes it so that all of the, even it's so even if you don't get indoctrinated, even if you have a great experience in college, even if you find lots of ways to grow individually through that experience, and you come out a better man than you going in as a boy, the odds of you finding adequate employment when you graduate are going down by the day. And this is all made worse by AI, of course, too.
And to add to those two people you cited, I recently learned I know someone who knows someone who lost their child, and this is in the U.S. And I don't know if it was high school or university, probably university, and I forget the gender of the child, but they believe or they want to be the other gender, and they've gone full on with this. And one of the parents is a Christian, and the other isn't. So that one supports it, and the other doesn't. And it's just like this is happening. I also just my quick recent, related to jobs. I laughed when in the past few months, out of the blue, I'm on different profiles still in China. Some of the top international schools in China were basically telling me to apply, send my resume, offering me a job in China. You were recently in Azerbaijan, and I laughed that a school in Baku offered me a job, in Dubai as well. But I think that's part of the international profile that I developed intuitively, following some of the principles that you locked down in the preparation. So it's one thing, you go in my profession, get a credential as a teacher, but it's another if I didn't have the profile that I developed on my own, complementing my teaching certificate, I wouldn't get these jobs. And so I think that's an
Makes sense.
important, yeah.
You're vastly more interesting. You're vastly more interesting. They want people who are interesting, So absolutely.
Yeah, and that's a strong principle in your book. And I, me getting my parents were totally just, middle class, and my way of powering through the undergrad was finding a affordable school. So I was in Illinois. I couldn't afford Northwestern, so I went to Northeastern, not the one in Boston, Northeastern Illinois, which is a teaching college in Chicago. And I got a FAFSA because of my father's salary, which meant free money. Basically, for my bachelor's, the government gave me free money, and they paid for it, and I even had money left over as well. And I was working full time. That's another principle in your book, where I was working full time as a high school student and university, so working 40 hours a week and doing high school and university. But before moving on to the second part of the book, I do want to just bring up, you guys have a great list of rules for conduct. You have these list of virtues from Greco-Roman times. You talk about stuff, not being phony, not betraying yourself or others, not doing things that that make you feel bad. There's a great section on finding a patron.
Yeah. Let me talk about the rules for a second, because one thing we do is we actually have the reader construct a personal code. And it sounds trivial on its face, but what it essentially does is it truly is the formation of self-esteem, where their self becomes separated from, what their peer group might do or what their parents want them to do, but they're independently making important decisions about themselves and how they're going to conduct themselves. And it starts off with a set of rules. And the guidelines we tell them for the rules, we don't tell them what rules. I mean, this will be different for everybody, but we don't tell them what rules, but we tell them, think about the things that when you do them, they make you feel small, that cause you to feel a little shame, or, you wouldn't want other people, the private things you wouldn't want other people to know about, those things that you engage in. Stop doing them. Like, don't do anything that makes you feel small. Like, it's a simple line to draw in the sand. But that is the beginning of real self-esteem, because you're saying these are the easiest things to do, is because all my friends do it or whatever. And you're like, but I don't really like it. So I'm just going to decide to opt out. I'm just not going to participate anymore. So having that set of rules is the first thing. The second thing is we do expose them to the ancient virtues, and we say, choose some of these that call to you. It's courage or justice or whatever, but think of some that call to you, and then write those down too in your personal code. Now, unlike rules, these are not binary, like a pass fail, like I did or I didn't do it. Virtues are something you could always be more courageous. You could always be more honest. You could always be more virtuous, whatever the virtue is. And so these become kind of like guide stones about the direction, the pursuit that you should be moving in and always striving toward. And then finally, below that, we ask them to start listing their accomplishments, which pile up super fast as they get into the preparation, because doing, again, is the primary orientation of the book. They do a lot of stuff in a really short period of time.
Yeah. And something else that struck out to me was amor fati, embrace your fate. And that's part of what you just described, the idea there. And again, it's something I came intuitively to my conclusion as well from the biblical worldview, coupled with Stoicism, which also I picked up, which you guys talk about. And it's kind of like, that's why I laugh when the DHS bans me from PayPal, or when the TSA gives me the dreaded 4S secondary screening often. It's like, embrace your fate. Just any thought on that?
Well, I totally agree. And I think the way that I attempted to bring it up in the book was to help people get over their past. It's very difficult people can hold on to these grievances or whatever with the past, with relationships with their parents, with kids. It's the relationships with the parents. They might hold some grievance toward that, or their siblings or whatever. And as you go through life, you have the opportunity to develop lots of grievance, lots of grievance. But the idea that in Stoicism, at least, is that that person who harmed you was actually doing what they thought was good. Now, I'm not saying objectively it was good, but they did what they thought was good and out of ignorance. And for that, you should forgive them, because we all act out of ignorance. And like, I grew up poor. I see that as a great virtue for me. Like, that's an amor fati. Like, instead, like, I embraced it and figured out how to use it for my advantage, rather than being the reason why I can't. So the thing is, the good thing about Stoic philosophy is, if you really understand it, it's about empowering an individual to confront reality and the difficulties of reality, and do it as joyfully as possible. And it's just super important, I think, especially in these times that we live in and that we're sending our kids into.
Part two now of your book, maybe have you tell us about that. You have the anchor courses, academic cycle, activities, do fun stuff, and it's almost like a series of crash courses. But I think that's good, because when I look back in my life, in my notes, I was thinking, again, Mongolia. I learned intermediate Mongolian in 11 weeks of Peace Corps intense training of 4 hours a day. Guitar, I self-taught myself guitar as when I was in junior high. In 6th grade, I fell in love with Soundgarden and Chris Cornell and that sort of music. And I'm like, I want to play these songs. And I just got a guitar from my uncle and was using tabs on the internet. And you have to have that motivation that pushes you to do it. And so, you've got the fighter segment that Maxim did. And, I was thinking of my time.
He starts that in January, actually.
Okay. So he hasn't gone to Thailand yet, or where?
No, he leaves in January.
And so I just real quick, my experience. So when I was working, another thing that I get from your book, this pride of starting from the bottom and getting to the top. I started working, I think, at age 15. There's a law if you have permission from your parents, I think, in the U.S. Can't recall.
In Illinois, it was. I remember. I was there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So then I'm not crazy. So my parents put me to work, that Croatian work ethic, when you have nothing. And so I started working at a supermarket at 15 at the bottom, $6 an hour pushing carts. The owners were 2 Greek cousins. And in those 5 years, I ran through everything, stocking shelves, the deli, the meat department, the produce section. Then I became manager, because I was a hardworking Croat and honest person. And then just having achieved that is like, wow. And that's some of the stuff I think what Maxim goes through. And it's like, that is the biggest lesson, that satisfaction, like through hard and honest work, I learn all of these skills and I go from nothing to the top. I mean, that's your story. And then just on the fighter section. So I was held up at gunpoint in 2004, I think it was. I eventually left in 2005. I quit because I was moving on with life. But 3 guys came in as I was closing I was the manager of the store, and the workers were there, and I was going to shut the door, and 3 guys walk in with guns blazing, and they stick the gun in my face, and I kid you not, they said, if this moves, I'm going to smoke his ass. That's what they kept repeating to me. And then he turned me around, put the gun in my back, and forced me into the office, which was in the middle of the store, and I had to open the safe. And they took like $5,000 or whatever was in the bank, and I was kind of like shaking. I called the police as soon as they let leave, and a dozen police, Skokie police cops come, and you're kind of shaking. I got $1 raise out of that per hour because the boss didn't want to lose me. But that was a great lesson, because then I started learning about Krav Maga, which I really like. And when I went to Mongolia in 2006, they gave us some security training. And, I had 2 incidents in Ulaanbaatar where I'm taking a bus at the crack of dawn to go back to the Gobi. and there's people shoving me, and I'm like, oh wait, they taught us this, and I was stupid. I had my wallet in the back pocket, and it's that preparation principle you guys talk about, that critical thinking. A normie wouldn't have done this, but I just realized quick what was happening, the training, and I just went like this, elbows out, and shoved everyone away from me. It was two thieves trying to distract me while they pulled out my wallet. And I found my wallet halfway out of the pocket. And then the other time was when I was leaving the hotel hostel in Ulaanbaatar to meet some friends at a bakery and passing between two buildings. And there's a Mongolian man. We're about to pass each other, and he's got an empty vodka bottle. And as we're about to pass each other, he smashes it against the wall, and he says, "Nig tugrug oguch," which means "give me 100 tugriks," which was the equivalent of $1. Thanks to the experience I had in Chicago, yeah, I was no longer afraid. I wasn't shaking this time because of having studied a bit of Krav Maga. The principle was like, you want to get out of this situation if you can without a fight, right? And I'm thinking, do I kick the bottle? Do I fight? Do I run? Like, or do I comply? He said, "Give me $1. Is it worth being stabbed to death for $1?" And I pull out I have a wad of cash, and I just hid with my other hand. I was hiding the the wad of cash, and I gave him, a few bucks. That calmed him down, and then before I could wait, I just slightly started walking away, and that was that. That could have ended up differently, but you just maybe on that cycle that tell us about these cycles, and maybe
Yeah.
to start the fighting one.
Yeah, sure. So basically, the book, the plan of action is broken up into 16 cycles. Each cycle lasts for 3 months, a quarter. So it's the equivalent of, essentially, if you're going to spend 4 years in college, there's, this is, effectively a competitor to that with a 4-year alternative. Each cycle consists of a few key elements, and the main one is what we call the anchor activity. This is kind of the adventure thing. This is often it'll determine where you are, because you can't do this. Some of the stuff you could probably do in your hometown. Some of the stuff you definitely cannot. And so, but this is kind of, as you're building your schedule out, this thing is the thing that got to go first. And so, just example of some of the anchor courses that we have in here. They're pretty broad range, but there's one my son did where he went the sailor cycle, where he went sailing around the Falkland Islands and through the Strait of Magellan. It was his first time ever on a boat. Okay, so it's and it was an extreme. It was probably the most fun he ever had. He also got seasick, twice. Thought he was gonna die the first time. And it was 3 weeks long, but it was quite an adventure. And he became, like a lot of the anchor activities, we want to. Not all of them have economic value, where you could then take that and do something else with, but a lot of them do. And with this one, you basically become a certified crewman, where you basically you could be hired to work on a sailboat. You could work on other people's sailboats, and so he gets a real skill out of it. He certainly learned how to operate the sailboat, and along the way, but it was quite an adventure as well. So that was the anchor activity for that one. Some of the other anchor activities include things like going to this place called the Shelter Institute in Maine and learning how to design and build a house in 3 weeks. There's a heavy equipment course where you learn to drive all the bulldozers, backhoes, all that stuff, get certified in them, which could offer great income. But it's kind of fun to operate these machines, quite frankly. And so it's a good skill to have. I kind of think like a man should be able to drive any vehicle that happens to be there. Whatever it is. These people who still can't drive manual transmissions, it shocks me, but it's like, you can't drive manual transmission. That's not good. You should be able to drive that, and you should be able to fly that plane over there too. And that's one of the cycles is the pilot cycle, where you actually get your private pilot's license. And my son did learn to fly. That's one thing he's done already. Another one is becoming an EMT. And this is where Max started. It's probably the easiest place for people to start, because wherever you are in the country, near you, there is a school that has an EMT school. There is one. It's relatively low cost to do. I think around $2,000. It's basically, it's a couple days a week for a couple months is how these courses work. But and after which you can work as an EMT on an ambulance crew or do other jobs. My son parlayed that into a summer job, working as a EMT on wildfires, earning $600 a day, which to me is shocking. That's a shocking amount of money. You have no room or board, obviously, because you're out in the middle of the wilderness during this time. So it's great cash, and it's a big part of what's helped them finance the program. But that skill alone, the ability to be able to deal with a unfortunate accident that might be in front of you, knowing what to do. You got to imagine the confidence that gives a young man. This was the first one Max accomplished. He was a totally different person by the end of it, because he walked around the world differently. Because he knew how to deal with a situation if it came up because of it. So I don't know how to deal with it. Honestly, I don't know, but he does. And so that it gives him some confidence. Competence gives you confidence, real confidence. So that's another one. There's a welding one in there. We have things that are where it gets more abstract. Like right now, Max is in the entrepreneurship cycle. And so his job for the last 3 months was to launch a business. And the measurement of success, the standard that we have, is to at least, the business doesn't have to be successful, because I've started a lot of businesses that aren't. So I certainly wouldn't have that standard is the only standard. But the idea that you create a product, you can generate a customer and successfully sell them the product and deliver that product. If you can do that, like, you have the things that you have to learn to be able to do that, to have that one event occur, is pretty remarkable. From sales and marketing, of course, to whatever's on the product side of things. So what Max did is he started an agricultural drone business here in Uruguay, and he didn't know. We've been learning about agriculture since we moved down to Uruguay, but I wouldn't say he knew a ton about it. But he certainly didn't know anything about drones and how they worked, and who the customer would be. And by the way, all of his sales have to be in Spanish, because that's where we are. So he's been successful at that. He's had 2 customers now. So as far as after the first one, I was like, I feel like you've really hit the major milestone, but you got two down. So I think you're in great shape. He's done a great job with it. And his next one is the fighter cycle. He goes to Thailand, and he's going to study Muay Thai at one of the camps where, you have workouts and twice a day, essentially. It's pretty intense. And, it'll be good for him. He'll love it. It'll be great for him, actually. He'll spend a couple of weeks in Japan before that. So that's the fighter cycle. We also have an investor cycle, because you want to know how. We do spend a lot of time talking about how, well, a lot of the book is about, the early part of the book is about dispelling myths about how the world works and how success is achieved. And also we get into money and finance a little bit, so people understand what savings is and how to save, and how all of our decisions actually relate to economics, just to put these ideas in people's heads so they can better rationalize their choices. And investing is an important skill. I would really say in today's markets, it's much more speculating than pure investing, because the markets are not totally real anymore. But this is a really important skill. So that's one of them. We also have another one we call hacker, where essentially you learn to build things without having to code. And I think this is really important, because I hope that most of the people who do this will end up being entrepreneurs of some kind, because it will allow them the greatest freedom in their lives versus having a job. But you need to know how do I say this? One way to think about a Renaissance man is that they understand how the world works, all of the practical dimensions of reality, and they know how to successfully interact with that reality to produce positive results. And the fact is, a lot of our reality is virtual. It is digital. And, we do create businesses online. And so it's important to be able to create in that world too. And if you have that as a blank spot for you, you might be severely limiting yourself in terms of what's possible. And so a lot of these no-code apps are using these AI tools. I used them. I use them to build apps as tests. just try it out. I'm not a coder, but these AI tools, with them, you can actually build some amazing things if you learn how to use them. So that's one of them. I mean, they're all designed really to give people an experience that is memorable, that they absolutely will not forget, and they walk away with an actual skill that they can use in the real world. And I think the other thing is that each one you're being thrown in a new environment with new people, with new things to learn. And I think that, that repetition of having to do that has been a big part of Max's maturation in all of this, because he's had to learn, he's had to have a better, more empathetic, probably understanding of other people, and learning how to work with people that are not like him, and actually finding out he likes those people too. It's like, these are really important things to get out of your shell and see. So that's the anchor course. And on top of the anchor course, we think the academics are important. So each cycle has academics, both some we select as sort of prerequisites, if you want to call them that, and others that are electives. There's reading that's assigned in there. There's a lot of reading we assign. Some of it might seem weird in that it's fiction, but we think in this fiction you find great examples of good men that will help you understand what it means to live a life of virtue, regardless of circumstance. So that's a big part of it. The other part is there's a whole series of additional activities we think are really important, like learning another language, learning to play a musical instrument, learning chess, a number of games we think are worthwhile to learn, frankly. Scuba diving, fun stuff, really, scuba diving, rock climbing, all kinds of stuff like that are in here, specific activities. And so we say, set aside at least 5 hours a week to do stuff like this and just test the waters with it. Like, go try it out and see what you think of it. Because, one thing that Max told me recently is that he actually, I think I sent you the article with him that he wrote this. He said that I, used to say, well, I don't really like that kind of thing, or that doesn't sound good. And he was selling himself short by doing that, because once he actually tried a lot of these things, he actually found out he really did like them. So we encourage people to try as much of stuff as possible. We have that in the activity section. And then finally, the other component of a cycle is reflection. And reflection has been huge for Max here. It's huge for all of us who do it, but essentially it's like a weekly review. How did I do this week? What exactly did I get done this week? And we encourage people to do what Max has done publicly for 2 years now at maximsmith.com, which is his personal Substack. He lists everything he did that week. And it's been a way for him to hold himself accountable. And it's also ended up producing this good journal of what he's accomplished that he can review. And over time, he's actually built a following there that actively goes out of the way to support him. He's had people come forward and say, hey, here's an opportunity for you, several times. And it's been taking him in interesting directions and expose him to new opportunities. And, the other thing that does for you is that for Max, he's become actually a good writer in 2 years. I mean, it was just basically just like a list on day one. And now he's a good writer. So, which is also a valuable skill.
I wanted to add, when you mentioned Muay Thai in Thailand, the first thing that comes to mind for me is Jean-Claude Van Damme's Bloodsport, and the opponent. If you remember the opponent that he had,
Yeah.
and I think it was in Thailand, if I recall. And yeah, the financing we sort of, I think, touched on. He's doing some menial jobs, and I think it's great. This was something instilled upon me. There's no job that's, let's say, that's bad, and you learn something. I think you guys mentioned it. Was it Office Depot?
Yeah. I'll tell you, one of the things that when Max first started out and he's doing his EMT thing, he's doing that. He's studying chess for an hour a day, and he's doing his guitar every day. He's doing all these different things, but he's like, Dad, I'm bored. And it's because he has unlimited energy. And I said, go apply for a job at every place around you. Just go apply and take whatever job is offered to you. And just as long as they will work around the couple things in your schedule that are not flexible, like with the EMT classes, and just take as many hours as you can. And I can't say he loved the job. I mean, it's kind of soul crushing in a way, sitting inside all day, waiting for a mostly empty store for customers to come. But he did learn some things doing it, and along the way, that in that 5 weeks he worked there, he saved $5,000. Because he was living with family, keeping his expenses down. And that's the other thing is when you're 18, you have no liabilities. You have no liabilities. You have unlimited energy. You have an open mind in a way you will not have when you get older. It's like to squander those years in indoctrination, or worst case, and best case, being put on ice, where you're considered a full-time student for 12 hours a week. Is just a giant mistake for a young man.
I was also going to relate what you guys talk about. I guess the entrepreneurship cycle. I mean, all of the things you have to do the preparation. Like this last year and a half, it's my first time doing really entrepreneurship with this podcast. And I'm learning how to do all this stuff. And it's kind of like when I first started, I'm like, I can't believe people are giving me money to do this podcast. It's not quite where it needs to be, but there's obviously something here. Like you already mentioned, if you're generating customers and leads, then there's something here. Now you just have to develop it. And the Spanish aspect, I started the podcast in Spanish. I interviewed 5 Mexicans, one of them, Ruben Luengas, who's a famous journalist. I became friends with him. He invited me on his Spanish podcast where he's got hundreds of thousands on YouTube. So I've been a guest on his, and it just I realized at the moment, I can't develop that because it's better to stick to the English version. But that's part of the process, like what you described, what he's doing with the drone business in Uruguay in Spanish. And so, and building a house is, I want to do that, what you mentioned, because I have my house here in Mexico. A lot of the houses have issues here in Mexico. And I'm thinking at some future point, I'd rather sell this and build my own house the right way, and so I might take some of those lessons. And, a lot of these certifications that he does, they can become jobs on their own. Like through some of my podcast guests and listeners, some of them are involved in the pilot world, and their kids, and, air traffic control, I read, can be a lucrative job. And it doesn't take long to get those certifications. Pilot, in some cases, 18 months. Someone I talked to recently, their kid is doing 18 months, and boom, you got your certification. You're off to the 18 months, it's better than 4 years. And if something,
and you have a real skill when you're done. You have a real skill, not just ideas.
Yeah, I mean, like, so Maxim, whatever, and if something happens, he can be the firefighter. He can be a pilot, and he's got that certification where I'm pretty sure. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. If he looked for a job, he'd get it. No.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it. And if he wanted to do the alt, like to maximize his lifestyle and the best job, he could go and work only in the summers fighting fires and bank enough money during the summers to finance himself for the rest of the year. So that's just from the first one. That's from the EMT. So yeah, absolutely. There's plenty of opportunity for him. And I've been really pleased that with the entrepreneurship cycle, that he's like, his eyes have opened up to it in a way he didn't understand before. I mean, he grew up around an entrepreneur, but it's kind of confusing what I'm doing most of the time to him. And so for him to see it for himself, to see like what it meant to generate a lead, to convert that lead into a sale, to deliver the product, the customer is happy, like to see that all come together, like it's like a light bulb. I still remember the first sale I had on the internet. I mean, it like changed the way I thought. I'm like, oh my God, if I could just do this like 3 times a day, holy shit, I mean, it just starts to get you thinking about the whole, like your possibilities in totally unique ways. And so the entrepreneurship cycle is really important. If it gets people to get one sale, it will have a huge impact on everything they do thereafter.
And I know someone in alt media who does what you just said. They're the firefighter for a season, and that's how they live. They have to go for that time, and then the rest of the year, they come back to Mexico. And maturity, we were messaging, and I mentioned to you, I thought of a student that I had here in Mexico who came from a very wealthy background, Mexican Jewish. They were Messianic Jews, and the kid went to Israel. I guess when he graduated high school, and he told me the kids his age in Israel were way more mature because of they have to go to IDF because of the global situation they live in. A lot of elements of the proper preparation, and then when I've seen interviews with your son by your side, Maxim, just from looking at him, his pose, his demeanor, his keeping quiet when he needs to keep quiet and speaking when he needs to speak, a lot of those stoic virtues, I could tell he's more mature than the average kid his age. And then going through this stuff, I mean, you mentioned he went from boy to a man. So just any thoughts on the level of maturity that he has now?
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking. I mean, as a dad, of course, I'm totally biased, but I'm also, honest to God, blown away by it. 2 years ago doesn't seem that long ago to me. As you get older, time just goes by really fast. So it's shocking, and that in that little of the time, it's made that big of a difference. And I'll send you. I don't know if you have time to listen to it, but he's done a couple podcasts alone, and he's way better alone, way better alone. And you just get to see it's hard to remember that the person you're listening to is 20. It's really hard to forget that. And yeah, the maturity is it. And I think the key to maturity is that you have to, as much as possible, you want to get your kids engaged with actual reality, because reality is humbling. Reality teaches you constantly. Like, it teaches you, it doesn't matter what you want. It's like, no, like, this is what it is. And so what do we do now? And so I think that maturity comes from a consistent and rapid, deep engagement with reality. And it just comes from that.
Just going to add as well. I mean, you already touched on the academic cycle, and when I was reading it, Doug talks about literature, and I am. This is important, and it keeps popping up with me when I attempt to discuss with my Mexican fellow neighbors, people, or others. You've heard me talk about the digital IDs that are coming in, the stuff that's going on where I live, and I'm like, in 1984's George Orwell or Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, and they're looking at me with blank stares. And I cannot believe how many people have not read those books. It's like, you guys have, like, I can't even explain to you. Like, you cannot even compute what's going on. You have no reference. It's mind-boggling. And then I'm just going to add as well the activity section that you mentioned, doing fun stuff. And I was just looking through the list. I'm like, I'm pretty good. I did a lot of those, and a lot of the ones I wanted to do when I was a kid. Krav Maga, martial arts, shooting guns. I have a license in Illinois. I've shot guns, paintball. I skydived when I was a young man in Chicago. I've bungee jumped twice in Croatia. A little bit of weightlifting, even acting. They forced me to act last year. My kids, they participate. There's a small, great theater here in Mexico, and they do these plays in front of hundreds of people. And they forced me to be the villain. I think it was like Pilgrim's Progress, or the second one. I was the evil giant, and I won the Oscar effectively. The kids are still terrified of me to this day. I'm not kidding. And everyone was like, in our church, everyone's like, that was an amazing performance, and I hated it. I didn't want to do it, and I don't want to do it again. But it was just kind of like one of those things. You got to step out on a limb. Any thoughts on resumes today? So you've got LinkedIn, and I've come to the conclusion resumes really aren't worth anything. Like, I was offered the job on TNT Radio, where I had a good pay for 2 years, based on my podcast work that I did as a hobby for 10 years. And so I think the same would go for your son. Like, resumes are useless today, no?
No, listen, I mean, who would look at your resume if you had a body of work? That's the thing. And build a body of work. And part of the forcing function in the reflection piece, where you're actually writing about what you've done, writing about what you've seen and what you've learned every week, you will develop naturally a body of work. Yeah, and on top of that body of work, you have a set of experiences where you've connected with people from all over the world. You've made friends with people from all over the world. You've had people come to you who just Oh, and the young people don't realize this, but there sincerely are older people out there that if they can see your body of work, they will come out of the woodwork to try and support you because they it's worthy and it's good and they want to encourage it however they can. And my son's definitely experienced that too. So people way above his level and all these different fields come to him, just say, I like what you're doing, and throwing opportunities at him. I think his biggest thing eventually, when he's got 2 more years left in this, uh, will be saying deciding what to say yes to. I think there's going to be opportunities available to him to do whatever he wants to do. So yeah, I don't see, yeah, I don't think a resume is a piss poor body of work.
I have to ask you this question. And so we talked about this 4 years ago, and maybe on a subsequent podcast after the new year, we can do a chat on this. But okay, so you get the preparation. He's doing all this stuff. I mean, in the current time that we're living in, we're living in a reprieve from COVID 1984.
Yes.
But I was talking about this yesterday with one of my past podcast guests. They've got stuff in the works for us, and the digital ID I think is going to be like COVID 2.0. Because I was looking at the Curp Biométrico in Mexico, the articles every week. This last week they were saying, without your Mexican digital ID, you won't be able to buy property, sell property, get married, get divorced, report, pay your taxes, pensions, put your kids in school, bank, renew your passport. If you're a foreigner, you can't get your temporary or permanent visa in Mexico. Like on and on and on. And so my question is, this year, and maybe in the next few years, it's okay for Maxim. But what about beyond that, being able to do the preparation in a technocratically locked down world? And just any thought on that?
Yeah, well, I think that's a good point. I mean, I will say, the thing is, the digital ID is clearly here. It's not, they don't have everyone in the system the way they'd prefer to have them in the system. But even they all have us in the system in some ways. They just want to close the loop on it completely. I mean, here in Uruguay, you have to have a cedula for everything. Your cedula, is a digital. They've got your thumbprint and they've got your face. So they've, I don't care if they have the face scan just by a picture. So I feel like they've got everybody in that. And in China, I have a friend who I talk to every Monday as part of our VIP group, and he lives in China. He's an American there, and he's like, everything is digital there. Everything is digital. He said they are not using it for any of those bad things that they could. So far, it's good. It could change at any time, but he recognizes reality, but he's like, it's there and it's not being used for nefarious purposes, at least in no way he's been able to observe in his 10 years of living there. So I think that the question is that, I mean, that's coming for us. We're all going to be in that system. I don't think it's avoidable to be in it. The question is, what do they do with it? What do they do with it? And I think when they do with that, we have to expect for those non-compliant sorts like us, we have to understand our life is going to become extremely restricted again. And we have to be in a position where we can endure that restriction. And I will say for my son and daughter, both are well aware of the situation. And, they understand that this is, they can do things now that they might not always be able to do. So they both understand that and are acting accordingly. Even my wife and I are planning way more travel this year than we've done in the last few years because, just because you can. And so now is a chance if you want to get out of your system. And also, trying to get my daughter started with some of the stuff to be helpful to her. We're going to tag along for pieces of it. So yeah, in the future, it's going to be more difficult, but I still think that even if you won't be able to follow the specific cycles that are in here, I do still think that wherever you are, this idea can be applied, and whatever is within your control, whatever approved regional zone you can travel to, you can find opportunities to find people and places where you can develop yourself by throwing yourself into the fire and studying hard and trying to, again, keep in back of your mind the whole time these virtues that we're striving to most of all, so that we can become the kind of men we want to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same plan. You can apply it and modify it given your local, global situation. And I agree with your assessment. Keep doing the preparation. We can still do it. I think even when the digital ID system comes, there'll be a time where you'll still be able to continue life as normal. I think eventually, I mean, you know me, the hammer will come down. The turnkey tyranny will be imposed, like in China. I mean, there is this social credit score in China. It's just that it hasn't been enforced yet. So I think that enforcement comes down the line. I also think that people who are very wealthy, because you'll have the carbon taxes that will force the behavior upon people who can't afford.
Right.
And
Yep.
so I think the wealthy, there'll be a time where the wealthy will be able to continue living somewhat normally. But I think even at some point, even they will have some restrictions. And what else was I going to say? I think, yeah, that was about it. I'd agree with your assessment. And then, any final thoughts? All the links are in the description. So thepreparation.com, smithsense.com, maximsmith.com, as the crisisinvesting, .com or .org, and
It's .com.
the .com. And I get a lot of books digitally from authors for free, but this is one of the books that I actually want to have in physical for myself to be able to highlight and maybe even gift to someone like you say, someone who's up and coming that could use it. And so, yeah, any final thoughts for us?
Well, I'll say I sent our buddy Parallel Mike one the other day with the Doug and mine and Max's signature, and I wrote a little note for his new little boy in there too. So yeah, I'll just say that, listen, I think that the young men, they want to be somebody. To be somebody, they know they need to do something worthy. Nobody has articulated up until this point an alternative path where you outline exactly what to do instead. And I think this book does it. I'm quite proud of it. And the best place to get it, really the only place to get it, is on Amazon.com. So go there if you want it. And one last thing I want to add is that your weekly updates you do for paid subscribers only are so freaking good. And if you are not a subscriber right now to his weekly update, you should be, because it is like the most intense, fast-paced, detailed news analysis you could possibly get. I'm like sitting there I'm taking notes, trying to scroll through the page while you're talking. I mean, it's so good. If you want to stay on top of events, like, that is the way to do it. I don't know how you do it, put it all together actually, but it's quite impressive. So if you're not subscribed to Vorier's Substack, you're making a huge mistake. Like, this is one you gotta see every week.
Thank you for that. It takes me about a full day of work, and I'm just that. I mean, what I do is basically what I do for myself throughout the week, just to figure out what's going on. Sometimes it's a bit esoteric, but I understand that there's just so much information. I want to digest as much as possible in the shortest time possible, and I've been trying to get it down to 90 minutes. 60 to 90 minutes, and I do the written format because some people and everything's sourced. It's all open source.
Yeah.
And I don't, there's Richard Grove, who I had on. He does it 6, 7, or 8 hours a week. I mean, his work is amazing, but there's just not enough time. But anyways, thank you for that, and you've given me a few bits of advice throughout the years as well, which I've taken to heart, and maybe you guys can start working on the preparation for women.
It has to come. My daughter is at the same age Max was at that point where I decided we needed the book. So yeah, it's on its way. And our first version, Max was our beta tester. Bella's going to be a bit of a beta tester, and part of it too. A lot of it will be the same. The tone will be written for a girl. There are different challenges, opportunities, fears, and ambitions that girls have than boys. So they have to be addressed, and I think addressed differently. and most of the cycles would be the same. But like, I don't want my daughter doing Krav Maga. Like, I'm just not cool with her taking elbows to the head. I'm just not. I just don't. I don't like that idea. So she should do some self defense, but not that.
Well, I mean, because I live in Mexico, I do want my daughter to learn Krav Maga. But anyways, fantastic book. I
Oh,
highly
I was saying. Sorry, I meant Muay Thai.
okay, Muay Thai.
I meant Muay Thai. I don't know why I said Krav Maga. Muay Thai, which is what my son's doing.
Okay, well, yeah, that makes per. I listened to your interview. Was it Peter? I forget his name. Borges or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Boxian? He said he wouldn't want because he.
I know,
I
it's
mean,
so dumb.
but yeah, I mean his interpretation. But I think I do think men and women, but more particularly men, do need to learn, be physically fit, and learn some sort of self defense system to protect themselves and the people around them. All right, I highly recommend the book. Again, that people get it. I'd recommend the physical edition. I know you have a hardcover edition, which is kind of steep in price, but there's a
It's
paperback.
expensive, and
Yeah.
it's expensive because all the money goes to Amazon virtually. But if you think about, if you have a young man in your life who would be a reluctant reader, then I would get the hardcover because it's full color also, and it's designed to be as beautiful as possible to make an impression on them, so that maybe they give a couple pages a read, and once they read a couple pages, they will be hooked. So that's designed for the reluctant reader. Is why that's focused. And just, the print on demand self-publishing stuff with Amazon's expensive.
Yeah, it is. And yeah, I'll end with again Sterling Hayden's. I love Veil, Wanderer, Art of Manliness, all that stuff. We need to be these kinds of men because they're hard times and they're only going to get harder. And I think what you're getting across, it's not just for your own self development. We need a brigade, an army of people thinking this way to fight through the hell that is coming. But anyways, thank you for coming back on the podcast, Matt.
My pleasure, sir. Thank you so much.